I'll call this regular council meeting in the Village of Graham-and-End order at 7:35 p.m. With us for prayer this evening, we have Pastor Ward Makovsky.
We just ask that you be with us in this meeting. We know that there are some tough decisions and challenges these days, and the direction for our island lies with our council, and we pray and we thank you for each and every one, and we just pray for this meeting for wisdom and guidance and direction. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick opening remarks. First of all, I want to extend a thank you to the groups that organized events over the New Brunswick Day weekend. Organizing any kind of an event is quite an undertaking. So to have three separate things happening all on the same weekend was a big thing for us. From what I heard, everything went well and were well attended, so we look forward to seeing that again, hopefully next year. For anybody who maybe was not on social media last week, the Premier and the Minister of Local Government were here on the island on Wednesday. We had an opportunity to sit down with them here to talk about a number of things. Obviously, everybody's big issue is the ferry, and so we did talk about that. We talk about that anytime we meet with someone from the province, and it was, I think, a good discussion. Obviously, no firm timelines yet, but we're continuing to make progress, and it feels like they're paying more attention, and we're starting to see some traction there. The other good news that came out of that is for anybody who's been to the hospital and used Teladoc, that contract was due to expire in September, and the Premier announced while she was here that it was extended till June of 2027. So that was a welcome newsflash for us. And my final thing is, the people that you don't see that actually get us on air every week are Caleb, Oscar, Jasper, and we have a new trainee tonight, Jack. Because this is Oscar's last evening with us, I feel like when we came back from COVID off of Zoom, Oscar was back in the control room giving us directions and has been here ever since. So while I teased him about, maybe he doesn't really need to go to university, he could just stay here and do our council meetings, he's insisting he wants to go away to school, and we do wish him the best and thank him for his dutiful service to us over the last, I'm guessing, 4 years anyway, if not 5. It's been a while, so we've really appreciated him being here, and we appreciate all the guys out back and the work they do to get us on air and broadcasting, so just a shout out to them. So with that, we will move on to item number 4, which is disclosure of conflict of interest. Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 5, which is adoption of the minutes. We had a special meeting on June 30th and a regular council meeting on July 6th. Councillor Green.
Madam Mayor, I would move that we accept the minutes as circulated for those 2 meetings.
You heard the motion from Councillor Green. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Valentine. Question? All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. Item number 6 is additions to the agenda. Not sure if anybody has any. We don't have anyone from the RCMP here, but we do have a meeting set up with them for September, so we will have some discussion with them prior to our next meeting. So moving right along, down to the 10-minute open session. Okay, I don't see any of our 3 attendees running, so we will move on. Item number 12 is petitions or written submissions to be read. The Graham-and-End Fitness Center, we had a letter of concern. Well, they start off to express my appreciation for the improvements that have been made to the facility over the past year, while also advocating for continued investment in what is arguably one of the community's most important health and wellness resources. I recognize and appreciate the work that has already been done to expand and improve the space. I understand that many of these enhancements stem from recommendations previously brought forward by Madison McLaughlin, and it is encouraging to see those concerns resulted in meaningful renovations. However, despite these positive changes, there remain several ongoing issues that significantly impact the overall quality and functionality of the fitness center. Much of the equipment is outdated and in need of replacement. The cable machine, one of the most frequently used pieces of equipment in the facility, is continually breaking down and requiring repairs. The leg press machine has never functioned as intended, and then there's some other issues that were outlined. I'm just going to skim down, and I would appreciate understanding what the long-term vision is for the fitness center. Specifically, is there an annual budget allocated for replacing aging equipment and repairing existing equipment when it fails? Is membership revenue being reinvested into the facility to ensure it continues to meet the needs of the community? I believe ongoing investment in this facility is an investment in the health of our community. Maintaining modern, reliable equipment and an inviting environment not only benefits current members, but also encourages others to adopt healthier lifestyles. Preventative health and wellness initiatives are becoming increasingly important, and our fitness center should reflect that priority. Thank you for taking the time to consider these comments. I appreciate the work the council and the Recreation Committee continue to do on behalf of our community. I hope this letter contributes to future discussions regarding the continued development and maintenance of this valuable community resource. Questions or comments? I don't know. I know that we do annually replace a piece of equipment there, but
Most of our equipment in there is new now. Everything older from the previous fitness center has been replaced. There are a couple issues with a couple machines, and the men from FitWorks visit regularly to upgrade those. We did just get FitWorks last Friday or the Friday before. They were in and replaced a few benches and things that were deteriorating. We're waiting on custom mirrors to fill that void where the old mirrors were. But we do have a bit in the budget for new equipment annually, and we use it.
any other questions or comments from around the table? Councillor Ross?
Yeah, I've been going to the fitness center for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and the only problem I see is one of the leg machines. I mean, other than that, everything seems fine to me.
Anyone else? I might suggest, though, maybe we have a resident relations committee. This might be a good place to maybe get them to have another look at it, make sure that we are, if there is any additional things that maybe we could do to address some of the fitness center issues, just so we don't lose sight of it. But in the meantime, we'll continue on. Councillor Green, do you have something besides that?
Just a question. You said FitWorks were here within the last week or so. Has this been in our possession for the month? I mean, or was it just the day or two? I mean, I'm just wondering if the things she's complaining about have been,
Yeah, and they did fix a couple of the issues.
so some of those have been addressed.
I can certainly reach out to her also and just see some of the issues that she's brought forward and just discuss them, and if there's anything else that she needs, things that we need to address immediately, we can do that.
So is that fair for a path forward? CAO?
Unfortunately, I think one of the biggest concerns now is space. And with the addition that we just went through, unfortunately, we don't have any more closets that we can tie into. So the next expansion would be significant investment to get the extra room. So.
Okay, so going forward, the clerk will reach out just to make sure that we've covered everything in the letter, that we have addressed those concerns, but in the meantime, we'll also pass this off to resident relations in case there are some additional things that we can address that way. So is that fair? Okay. So that moves us right down to item number 16, which is bylaws, and 16.1 is the procedure bylaw. And I had asked something to be included in the package, but basically there's a couple of things that I think we need to talk about. Our current procedural bylaw was passed in 2004, so it's a little dated, especially when you look at some of the terminology around the technology. It refers to only he in there, which apparently assumes we can never have a female mayor, which, fine. But that's not really the impetus for looking at this point, is there was a Supreme Court decision back in 2015 that called opening prayer for the city of Saguenay discriminatory. And so I think we kind of knew that at the time, but chose not to move forward with it. It has come up several other times from time to time since then, and we realized probably about a month ago that Tobique Valley, which is pretty close to home, is currently facing a lawsuit from a nonprofit organization because they've continued their opening prayer. So our opening prayer is continued on our procedural is part of our agenda in the procedural bylaw. And I think it's one of those things that we have an obligation, regardless of what our personal beliefs are regarding prayer, religion, and any of those things, but as the council that is responsible for looking after the municipality, we have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the village. And so I think we need to have a conversation about how we proceed with that, recognizing that in 2015, the fine was $15,000 plus legal costs, where that could potentially leave us going forward. There was some legal advice that I found online that was also included in there. It basically lays out two options. It strongly recommends reconsidering having an opening prayer at the beginning of session. Or the other option that it outlines is that if you are going to continue with that, that you are being inclusive of all religions and all beliefs, so that you're not singling out any specific belief in the opening, so that it is an inclusive environment for people, because that is what happened in Saguenay. So that's sort of what has brought the procedural bylaw, in my mind, to something I think we need to talk about sooner rather than later. If we're going to talk about it, if we're going to do it, I think we need to do a whole overhaul of the bylaw. I've thrown some other suggestions in there. Just some practical things that I find problematic sometimes as far as meeting scheduling, particularly in the summer, because our regular meeting falls on the first Monday of the month. And if that is a holiday, the procedure bylaw moves it to the following week, which sometimes means we end up with 5 to 6 weeks, or 5 weeks anyway, between meetings, or 3 weeks, because just the way the weeks line up. A lot of other municipalities, if the meeting falls on a holiday, they have the meeting the next regular business day, which in my mind keeps us on the same regular pattern. So instead of having this meeting tonight, we would have had it last Tuesday night, so we would have been on a regular timeline. I noticed a couple weeks ago that Quispam-Cis has more than one regular meeting, and that's, as we get into the fall and winter and things get busier, things are kind of a little slow right now because it's summer and everybody's trying to enjoy the weather while they can. But a lot of times we end up having extra special meetings, or our meetings run really long. And I think it's worth having a conversation of if some months does it make sense that we schedule a second regular meeting, so that we're not. Sometimes I think we have looked at the agenda in the past, it's looked really long, and we've rushed through discussions and maybe not spent as much time on things as we could have. And I think it's worth having a conversation about, does it make sense that we have more frequent meetings to avoid that from happening? So those are a few things I threw in there. You know, is 7:30 the best starting time? Because I know some people struggle with later in the evening as we go. And the other thing that jumped out at me is we always have articulated rules around the 10-minute open session, but they are not clearly defined in the procedure bylaw. And as you look around at other municipalities that have had more and more issues with people coming to open session, and sometimes those conversations being difficult to control, is how I will phrase that, I think we need to clearly delineate what our rules are with the open session, because I think we've got a good standard practice, but I just think we need to put it down on paper. So those are a few of my thoughts about why we're here, why this is on the agenda. I'd open up the floor for conversation. I'd articulate that.
I think that we should stop because
Mayor Sturgeon?
dangerability.
But with all due respect.
Okay,
it's
just
fine.
to-
Sorry, I'm
Well,
sorry, but, ma'am, I'm sorry, madam.
First of all, the comments should be directed through the chair. I see the deputy mayor, I see Councillor Green, I see Councillor Toll, but before we go to any of them, I am just going to say that we're going to have a level conversation. We need to remember that this is not about our personal belief system, but it's about what is in the best interest of the municipality of the village of Grand Manan. And that's what I think we have to make sure we're maintaining at the forefront, not whatever our own personal beliefs are. I think we have to use our own judgment, but that's part of sitting around this table, and part of the fiduciary duty is once you have recognized that there is a potential issue, you have a responsibility to address it. It's no different than if you go to a playground and you see that the swing is broken and it's about to fall and you don't address it, you have opened the village up for liability. It's the same thing, it's just this is a bit more of a personal issue for people. So I believe my list was Deputy Mayor Sturgeon, Councillor Green, and then Councillor Toll.
First off, Madam Mayor, I'd like to apologize for interrupting. That's unprofessional, being out of say. And, no, that's pretty much all I got to say for, at this time. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Green?
Yes, I believe that we do have a responsibility to our the public to represent them in a rational, sane way. I believe that we have a responsibility to consult them. I believe we have a responsibility to follow due process. And I think by referring this to the procedural, the bylaw committee for review, and to amend or replace that bylaw with a different one, however if it's just a snip here or there or a complete rewrite, time will tell. And we'll do that. We're in the process. And to try to short circuit that process is not a responsible way to react at this point.
Councillor Toll?
I remember this, I know this is really hard for all of us, really, but I think that we have to know that this is now out there, because when we went to the orientation, they specifically said that this was not to be allowed anymore for those legal reasons. Because once you open yourself up to that and the public get to know about it, that's when they're going to start saying, okay, well, if you guys are still doing that, I'm going to see what my lawyer can do for me, because that's not what I do, or he does, or whoever does. That's all.
So I think we've gone around the table with this, unless Councillor Anderson, I see you haven't spoken yet, so. Yeah. I apologize.
My bad, I didn't push the magic button. Okay, thank you. These are all very, very important points, and I come from a background where I realize and appreciate that what the Supreme Court has to say stands, but I also did some reading on this, including the case law, and noted that it also acknowledged that not every circumstance applies. There are variances in how councils practice themselves, and that in some cases the lawsuit was very specific to the Lord's Prayer and not another way of asking for guidance. That doesn't mean that we have an automatic decision. We need to investigate this further. We need to make sure we have the appropriate legal recommendations. But I did notice that there was a lot of differences as far as context, timing, specificity, when it came down to, was there an actual neutrality on behalf of council? Was there any breach of neutrality? Were there any complaints received or harm done? Now, I think we are practicing due diligence by moving forward with what we're doing, but I don't think we want to give the inference that we've already done wrong. It is my opinion, my respectful opinion, that we continue as we have been doing. We're showing our due diligence moving forward, and that we be expeditious in doing our research, getting the appropriate amount of input to committee, and coming back with a resolution. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Burnham Ross.
Yeah, I think we should continue with it as well. I mean, you get screwed around with the higher power, you're gonna be in trouble. And money, we throw enough money away, we don't throw it away, but we invest it in stuff that don't really need to be a lot of times. And, I mean, if we're gonna get sued, then we're getting sued for the right reason, I'm sure.
Okay. Councillor Greenlaw. I think you're the last one that hasn't spoken, so this will wrap it up.
Madam Mayor, I agree with Councillor Valentine, Councillor Toll. I think we're opening ourselves up to a liability that we don't need, and we have a lot of newcomers. We have a lot of new faces. We need to be aware that there's not just one religion that's to be recognized.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank everybody for having an open, frank, but civil discussion, because I know it is very emotional for people, and I think it's a big discussion, and it's a big issue to have a conversation about. So I think, based on what I've heard, that we will move forward with, I think Councillor Anderson said the word expeditious review, but review nonetheless of the procedure bylaw, and then we will come back and have another conversation, I'm sure. So go from there. Is there anything else before we wrap this up completely? Hearing none, I will call that one closed, and we can move on to 16.2, which is another fun topic, a subdivision bylaw. So, welcome to the hot seat. For those of you who don't know Alex, I'm going to let him introduce himself, just because I think that's probably easier than me mangling his title. So,
for the new counselors, my name is Alex Henderson. I'm the planning director at the Regional Service Commission. So the Regional Service Commission is essentially like your contracted employees when it comes to development officers, building inspectors, and planners. So when council wants to update its rural plan, adopt a new planning bylaw, we work with the council, and council then refers said documents to the PAC for their views. So it acts as a special committee for bylaws related to the Community Planning Act. And yeah, so this is one of these things that from time to time you got to update your bylaws. You're just talking about your procedural bylaw, but the subdivision bylaw for the Village of Grand Manan, there's been a few things which we've looked at with this bylaw, and it's important. You know, this bylaw refers to how land is divided in Grand Manan. So if you're going to subdivide a lot, not just when you think of a subdivision, you might think of a street, you might think of a whole neighborhood or something to that effect. Dividing one lot is a subdivision under the Community Planning Act. So this bylaw refers to even that kind of development. But then we get into what's called type 2 subdivisions, when you have a new street or new private access proposed. That's a subdivision as well, and there's different criteria for that under your current bylaw, which is bylaw 2-95. And also with the Community Planning Act, when it comes to subdivisions, there are public benefits that are involved. There's facilities that are inherent to every subdivision based on its class and standards. So you might have, in the current bylaw, there's a requirement for trails to public amenities, such as schools, churches, and other playgrounds. Public benefits can also come in the form of land for public purpose. We've had many discussions with council about that in the past year. So there's been some things which have kind of created some frictions around land for public purpose. PAC has written letters to council related to this. We've had discussions with PAC about it. So what we basically said is, let's have a conversation with council after staff had a chance to look at this, bring forward a recommended document, and then council can deliberate, decide what you want to do. This is your document. You don't have to adopt it. You can amend it, you can change it. But the process tonight would be to look at it, have this discussion, and if you're kind of comfortable with the more or less direction of it, send it to the PAC, and they'll do the further deep dive on the document. And then it can come back to council for readings. And in the readings, you have opportunities to further make changes, make amendments. It's optional for council to do public engagements. As well, we're going to be doing, we'd have to be doing stakeholder engagements with the provincial government, DTI especially. But anyway, I'm jumping ahead. So yeah, this is an important document, one which, again, this is going on 30 years since it's been updated, so we need to have a look at it. The current bylaw refers to outdated legislation, so that's a problem. It also refers to standards that don't exist anymore. So you look at the current subdivision bylaw, refer to a street being 20 meters wide. Well, go to the DTI manual, 2026 right off their website talks about 24 meters wide. So you could have a situation where somebody proposes a new public street and DTI won't accept it because it doesn't meet their standard. That is a problem. When it comes to private access, PEC and staff have had lots of deliberations and developers, and there's some frictions around that. There's a number of learnings that have been embedded in this new proposed draft, which hopefully will address a lot of those core concerns that have come up through previous applications that have either took a long time to get approved because there was issues, or there was things, done where it's like, we really should work on this in the future. Cumbersome cash in lieu process. One thing which we have talked about before is when a developer doesn't want to do this LFPP, the land for public purpose, where they create the dedication of a public park or just an area of community interest. For example, when the K family subdivided their property, the hole in the wall now is land for public purpose dedicated to the village of Grand Manan. Significant community asset now is actually in public ownership. But that allows that whole parcel of land to be subdivided, and it's credited against the future development of that land. So they won't have to continually dedicate lands to council. It's one and done there. But these are ways for the community to access lands for all kinds of purposes. But there are opportunities for developers to say, look, that's going to be awkward for the kind of development we're doing here, to do a land for public purpose. How about a cash in lieu process? And the way the rural plan talks about it is cash in lieu is just going to be the assessed value of the property, and it's just a percentage of it. So similar percentage as what you're dedicating for land for public purpose, and if it was an area of land, or a percentage of the value, the market value of the land according to Service New Brunswick. And the way it would work in this is it actually can come to the PEC as the developer's proposing cash in lieu, versus before it was the developer had to propose land for public purpose and council had to reject it and say, no, we want the cash in lieu, which created a very cumbersome process. The current bylaw has no application fees. So developers can keep proposing different applications, changes, this, that. There's no way we can charge them for that service that goes into processing that. Now, the Regional Service Commission keeps no application fees. All of it comes back to the village, and it gets credited against the cost of the service that we charge the village. So the application fee, in our opinion, is essential. What we have put forward in this document is the bare minimum, the standard application fee, which has been in place in most communities in New Brunswick since 1981. And that basically accounts for the fact that there is a process involved. There's a lot of work that goes into these applications. And it's actually in some ways kind of a nominal sum in the big picture of a subdivision. But there needs to be something, and the current bylaw lacks any fees whatsoever. The other thing which we look at with these subdivisions is there's not one right size for every subdivision. We talk about private streets and what's the maximum length of a private street. Well, it really actually depends on the purpose of the private street. So we talk about private streets for residential development. We talk about private streets for, say, woodlots or a farm development. These are very different purposes of land. So we shouldn't have a one-size-fits-all standard or process or consideration for lengths, widths, etc. The current bylaw just has that, one-size-fits-all. So in this, we're actually proposing standard for public street, which is the DTI manual. It's an engineering document that applies to the whole province, adopted by the cabinet, and that's required. You have to do that. And we have private street class A. So these are streets that a developer may want to keep private, but they might also want, the owners might want to convert it to a public street later and hand it over to the minister or the village. In that case, they should be designed as such that they could be converted, meaning they're not going to have to widen out to 24 by expropriating lands. They're not going to have to come in and redo the grades of the gravel underneath the pavement, those types of things. It all should be designed ahead of time to be capable of it. Then we have subdivisions that are, a parent, a couple children, or a group of neighbors, small group of neighbors, and it's just a existing driveway. There's nothing special about it, just a right-of-way. Well, this is a subdivision that should be simple. There shouldn't be all this complicated land for public purpose dedication. This is something PAC said. We should have ability to subdivide on accesses without triggering LFPP every time. There, I think, talked about maybe 5 acres. And I said, PAC, let's have a conversation about the access in general. I'll bring back something. You guys can deliberate, talk about it. But the idea with Class B shared driveway is to say just the length of it, make sure it fits the National Building Code requirements for firefighting access. So you're not going overly long and having, 10, 20 homes on this driveway where firefighter access and these things become problems, maintenance liabilities. And then you got neighbors who are saying, oh, well, so-and-so's not paying, and so-and-so, and then it comes to the village as, hey, can you take this over? This is not supposed to be ever taken over as public street. So shared driveways are intended to be purely private, to be informal, to be simple, and to not have a lot of complicated procedure. Then there's resource access. These are not residential accesses for subdivisions. So they're not roads that you're creating for the purpose of doing 1 acre lots and having house lots built. These would be in the rural type zone, further afield from the public road. These are lands which are developing for fisheries, woodlots, farms, a tenant tower. These are subdivision roads that are accessed seasonally, infrequently. 6 meters wide, it's good enough, basic. But these also could be land development projects too, like resource development, and there should be a public benefit for parceling out the land for natural resource development. So land for public purpose can still be considered as part of this. Trail consideration for access to the Bay of Fundy could be still considered part of Class C. And if there's camps, let's say, that are around, we have a couple around Miller's Pond, for example, that had to do land for public purpose. There's no way really there could have been land for public purpose out there. It's a private road. So this would have been an example where you could have potentially used this to say, look, we're going to cut pre-existing camps that are out there. We can keep you on this type of very minimal, seasonal, occasional access, and we could do it without putting you through a whole process. So if it's already there, we can make it very simple and straightforward. So when it comes to these accesses, we talk about the firefighting access, this is actually very important. We have situations where if the road is not built out correct, and people are developing their year-round houses, their nest egg for retirement on these roads, and sure enough, in springtime when the road is sodden, there's no way that this road can be built to carry a laden fire truck. Or even an ambulance. God forbid you had an emergency where you had to call someone and there's no way they could get up your driveway. So by limiting the length of the informal driveway access, that's the number one way you can do this, because there's still ways to bring a hose, there's still ways to bring in a stretcher. It's about consideration of the future. The other thing too with private access is making sure the system is there to maintain the access. Again, if it's a small road shared by a couple neighbors, the chances of the system breaking down are less than when you add in more and more complexity, when you add more and more neighbors onto the shared driveway. That's when chances for breakdown occur. So making sure the system is in place, making sure the plan is stamped with a caveat note, buyer beware on these, but also in cases where you have a well-designed private street that may be converted to a public street later, having a road owners association in place being critical. They're complicated. They're kind of like condo boards. You got to meet, you got to raise fees, you got to have good governance practices to have a road association, or it falls apart. So you really want to reserve these for those kinds of developments of road which are big investments, where you have someone to do the legal work to create them. We want to make sure that all of this is backed up by your rural plan, which sets good policy framework for future development of Grand Manan, considering emergency access, considering water supply, all of the good stuff, making sure that development is, considering that there is natural resource development, there's the fishery on the island, there's opportunities for all kinds of other types of development other than just residential streets. So making sure that that is all consistent. Another big thing which we heard during the rural plan development and has come up during discussions in the past is making sure the shoreline, the accessibility of the shoreline is still there. Like I said, the current subdivision bylaw has this standard for, if you're over 315 meters on a road, then the way you can go longer is as long as you have trails accessing schools and churches and amenities and having some facilities to the subdivision that are just mandatory. Well, that doesn't really seem to be the priority for Grand Manan, but what we have heard is the concern around where there's a lot of people coming in, buying up the shoreline, subdividing into lots. Previous informal trails down to the water are being lost. It may be quiet, it may just be that, where there was once a trail that was used by everybody on the back lots, when it gets subdivided and developed, they put up fences and can't go down there anymore. So the idea being that if there's no public access within a radius of that subdivision, we can make sure that there is an easement down to the water vested in the village with a general accessibility to all people in Grand Manan. It doesn't mean that the village has to go in there at a great expense and put in great amounts of sidewalks. It could just be vested as an easement and they're on a plan. And then if people were to go in, they're able to walk down that designated section. So 3 meters, not a huge commitment. And the cheapest way to do it is the time of subdivision, because you can acquire it as a basic facility if the subdivision meets a certain set of criteria. And as we talked about land for public purposes, one of these friction pieces in the current subdivision bylaw, a lot of ambiguity. The land for public purpose, my understanding, prior to the Regional Service Commission working with the village, this wasn't necessarily enforced. That said, it doesn't mean it wasn't applicable. When we work with local governments, we can only work with the bylaw you have on the books, right? We don't have the ability to set aside sections of your bylaw and say, well, just because it wasn't done in the past, we're not going to do it today. That exposes me to liability. Say somebody was wishing there was some access to like a boat launch vested in the village and then we ignored it, I'd be in trouble. So I cannot just set aside the way 2-95 is written. The only exemptions in bylaw 295 for land for public purpose are the following. If you're on a public street, and if you're doing a development that is, basically if you're on a public street, because the other one is, if you're doing a multifamily development on a public street, you also need to do land for public purpose. So if you're doing an apartment building and you have road access, they also want land for public purpose for that subdivision along the road. So with this, we're going to propose to council a number of exemptions, including, I'll just show you here, including if you're doing the Class B, so the shared driveway, we would recommend in that case, it's a couple lots, they're not very long. That would be a type of subdivision, it's simple, small. You shouldn't be requiring land for public purpose in that case. In a case where you already have a previously approved access that already meets all the standards, that's a case where you're not going to need to have land for public purpose dedication. For example, let's say there's an already existing private access and there's a camp at the end of it and they have to access by this existing private road. Requiring land for public purpose in that case doesn't make any sense. And that's been pointed out to us, and I would agree with that. But that is the way the bylaw is written. So we can change that if council approves a new bylaw. There is a number of exemptions for, let's say somebody wants to create a lot and then dedicate it to the village, just a standard lot. Well, that is land for public purpose in a way, but the act is very specific about what land for public purpose is. But we say recognize that as land for public purpose. When we have parcels being created, like you shift the boundary lines of a property, we shouldn't trigger land for public purpose. So there's a number built into there. If you're assembling land, like you're a developer and you're buying chunks of land and you want to reallocate and consolidate some PIDs, you shouldn't have to do land for public purpose because you're doing this in preparation of a future development. So we can add in more exemptions than we currently have is what I'm saying. And yeah, just a number of things. Yeah, we talked about the old bylaws written under a repealed act. It still has effect, but if someone was to read it, I say Section 46 of the Community Planning Act, they'll have no idea what that's actually referring to unless they talk to someone like me who knows all the cross-references that are. So we need to make sure this bylaw is up to date. Talk about the standard for private access. You know, one size does not fit all. Emergency access for private access in the old bylaw, current bylaw, it's silent. Private road upkeep, the current bylaw is silent. Access to the shore, there's really no tool available to council other than in a case the developer was okay to propose land for public purpose on the shore. Like in the case of the small family, they were gracious enough to propose the hole in the wall, but they didn't have to. So if you want to say that is something we want to see in subdivisions along the Bay of Fundy, to make sure residents on back lots have some way to access shore, council can put that in the bylaw. And to make sure cash in lieu, when a developer is like, we just want to do that instead of propose this land for public purpose, we should make it simple that they can apply for that day one, and then it goes to PAC as, hey, we're proposing cash in lieu to council, and then we have a system to do that. So, in terms of what your next steps could be, council could simply just refer this bylaw to the PEC tonight, and it's at council's pleasure to have a discussion or just to jump ahead to the motion. That's fine either way. To direct staff to start consultations with the various provincial agencies on this draft. And at the next step after that would be to consider the bylaw readings. So in that, there's no requirement to have a public hearing objections. So, but you could decide, hey, we're going to have like a public information night about this once you get closer to a draft that, you know, the broad outlines council's more is not a full consensus, but maybe more or less you guys are deliberating on this draft. So you could have a public information night at any point you want to do, and staff are happy to show up. Like I'd come to that for sure. But yeah, it's not a public hearing of objections like the rural plan where it's advertised on this certain time frame and et cetera, et cetera. The act looks at the subdivision bylaw similar to a building bylaw. It's considered more of a background document. This is more of a subservient document to your rural plan. It has to adhere to all your policies of the rural plan. Yeah, so they look at it as more of a sort of tertiary or minor bylaw. But if there's any questions, those are kind of the goals in my mind and some of the discussions the PAC had that kind of directed this so far. But council may have other goals or want to reframe any of this. But yeah, access, making sure they're improved for the long-term future considerations, making the process streamlined, and to ensure there's public benefit to Grand Manan families when there is development. With that, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take the liberty of asking the first question before I open it up. Your slide that you had previous about consulting the other relevant provincial agencies, you said it was different than the rural plan, but how involved do they get? Because I know with the rural plan, they had the ability not essentially to say yay or nay, but yes, to say yay or nay to the rural plan. Like, do they have that same level of input on this, or how does that work?
Yeah, they do, but it's not. Look, this bylaw doesn't go through the same level like the rural plan did in terms of you can adopt it, I believe, without the ministerial approval. So that's a big difference. But they do recommend it because in this, it's going to implicate DTI with a number of things. They're going to want to make sure it's thus and so. There's a few other agencies that are also, they're very interested in how the village subdivides properties and such like that. But again, even in the rural plan where the provincial agency says, we like this, we want this, there's a way for us to bridge between what they're saying, what council's saying. And I think we will always make sure it's your document in the end, and you cannot pass it in the end, for sure.
Thanks for that. Any other questions? Councillor Green?
You say streamlined. Now, today, I hear all kinds of complaints about how long it takes for the process to go through. Could you give a guesstimate as to, are we going to cut that by 50%, 10%, 20%, or?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think it's going to cut out at least a frustration around the going to PAC with this land for public purpose that they don't really want to give, that they really want council to do cash in lieu. So it hopefully saves a whole meeting in that case, which can mean in the process 2 months. The other thing is, we had an application, I won't say which, but it was, we had a couple delays because staff would be saying, we're not recommending this, doesn't meet the standard. And the PAC were like, we kind of agree, but we'd like the developer to do this, this, and this to meet certain requirements. And they were not doing those things, and we couldn't prove it. And so it had to come back with hey, if you just fundamentally change something here, we can recommend it. That took a lot of deliberation because the problem is, like currently under 295, there's a lot of vagary with what the private access should be, what the criteria for them should be. It's a 5-page bylaw, and that's fine. And we're not going crazy here. This is a 9-page bylaw, but there's a little bit more substance here to help direct some of those developers before they come to the PAC, as opposed to the PAC being in the uncomfortable situation of having to come up with standards on the fly. So we don't want that to happen because that can create delays. So I think if we could, I can't give you a percentage in terms of how much faster this is going to be, but it at least will avoid certain things we have seen that have caused multi-month delays. So I'm hoping that this could streamline. The other big one, this is actually, this is in section 3 of the proposed draft. If there's a previously approved access and it meets one of these standards already, let's say it's a shared driveway and the length works, the width works, and there's 2 lots on there and they want to add a third. Well, if that private access was already in place by a PAC from the 90s or the 2000s and was already approved on the plan, well, this bylaw would say that private access is deemed as approved by the PAC. And we can just approve it at the development officer's office, and that will take 10 business days. So that alone could cut months off the approval process. And that would apply to other types of private access as well. So if it meets all the standards for natural resource access, even if it's longer than the length, but it's for a non-residential property type or a camp lot that's already in existence, well then we can, if it's on a previously approved private access, we can just approve that at the development officer's office, which is a significant streamline over the current process. So it's considered we call it a deeming provision. Those accesses are deemed to be approved.
Deputy Mayor Sturgeon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a couple questions, really. First off, kudos. It does seem like, especially for someone who wants to basically give a piece of property to their family or whatever, seems to be easier, which is great. I got some questions in that regards, though. It says here for Class B, 7.3, a shared driveway conform to the following standards. And A is no more than 3 lots shall be served by the shared driveway. Yep. So how big can these lots be? Is there any maximum or in that regards, like how big the lot must be?
So yeah, that's a good question. So what it is, it will refer to in section 10 the lots, blocks, and other parcels. So the dimension and area of a lot in a subdivision are subject to the requirements of the rural plan. So you don't have to put all of that in here because it could depend on the zone
Okay,
and the requirements there. So.
okay. And the other question I have is to me, directly after that, the length of the right-of-way shall not exceed 90 meters. I assume this is a provincial standard, or just something that's suggested, or what?
Yeah, so this is something which, this is in the case of a non-engineered road, so meaning it's like just a regular residential driveway.
Yes.
And the standard we're referring is actually the National Building Code when it comes to firefighting access.
Okay.
And there's still opportunities for PAC to look at something and say, okay, well, this is 120, and they're going to have this consideration. PAC still has the power of variance. So there could be a reasonable consideration to go longer. But what you want to put in a bylaw is the best practice, the standard that should be adhered to as this is what we're aiming at, but there's always reasonable accommodation, and that's for the PAC to decide.
Okay. Madam Mayor, I have one more question, if it's okay. Thank you for that. The other thing is public trail easements to the Bay of Fundy. And I understand 3 meters wide, and as long as there's nothing within 250 meters of that, okay, that's fine. But it doesn't make any mention of how long an easement can be for those 3 meters. Is there any maximum length in that regards there?
No, and here's why. Because we can't envision every possible scenario, but it's also that these easements are not designed for vehicle access whatsoever. So we're not so worried about the length of the trail. In fact, the longer could be, the better. It just provides amenity to the subdivision, as well as providing amenity to other Grand Mananers who live in the area. So, no, it's basically what it would happen in a case like that. Let's say a developer was proposing a subdivision along the Bay of Fundy, and there was no other public access point, like no road end, no park, no municipal building. There was nothing else in 250 meters of the boundaries of the subdivision. What we would do is say to the developer at the development officer's office, we'd say, look, we need to see a 3-meter easement on the plan. Here's what we're going to suggest, but it's going to go to the PAC for their views, and PAC can either approve it or deny it. And we had the considerations there, the considerations being the topography of the land and the safety and convenience of the proposed pedestrian access to the shore. Meaning, if it's going to be in a location that dumps you out in the middle of an intersection, or it's in an area where you have to climb a cliff to get over, not acceptable. But, that's the just basic sense type of stuff. You're welcome.
Anyone else? Councillor Green?
As the part he was just talking about, public trail easements to the Bay of Fundy, was there any consideration of other bodies of water, like the ponds, streams and stuff, where people may go trouting or whatever, if they could be included in that or whatever?
Through you, Madam Mayor? So yes, we did consider it. Look, it could be done. It could be done. And council, if you so direct, we will put that in there. And then send this, when you're ready to send it to PAC, they could also recommend something different or something additional to that. But, this is new. And what I was kind of thinking is in terms of the risk. So trying to be realistic about this as well. Oceanfront has a very high value for property, as you know. And there is a risk with Grand Manan getting more and more popular, more and more tourists coming here. Like I'm trying to find accommodations tonight. It was extremely difficult. It's great for Grand Manan, but it's going to bring new residents, and that's also wonderful. But there is different values about access to the water, and some people may view their shoreline as purely private, even if there was an informal trail. So in terms of the risk factor, I think this, I'm offering to council, this is probably one of your priorities based on the community consultations we did at the rural plan. But if you feel that, access to the creeks, the ponds should also be considered, I wouldn't disagree. I just think in terms of your first, like, really the most top priority, I wouldn't drop this. I think a lot of people care deeply about this idea, but that's just my opinion. Yes, and yes, no, I'm just saying, like, as a baseline, this should be there, but you could go further. Yeah.
Other questions or comments for Alex while he's here? So I'm assuming procedure-wise, we refer it to the PAC for comment. Once we have the comments back from them, then we could proceed to first reading, would make sense.
That's correct.
Okay. So at this point, I would be looking for a motion from the group, if it's the will of the group, to refer this bylaw to the PAC for comments. I believe we give them a time limit?
30 days.
30 days.
I move we refer, this doesn't have a number yet either, the new subdivision bylaw to the PAC for their comments and concerns.
You heard the motion from Councillor Green. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that, Madam Mayor.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Sturgeon. Question.
Yeah, I have a question because I'm going away in September, and the 30-day limit will be an issue. And Trish is going away, and we're chair and vice chair of the PAC.
And perhaps, given that it's summer, maybe we could extend it to mid-September, and then it's back to us for our October meeting. Does that make sense timeline-wise?
Extended until the end of September?
Is that comments from the mover and seconder? Okay, so there is a motion on the floor to refer to the PAC with comments back by the end of September. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded? Motion carried. Thank you, Alex.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you coming. I think it's really good to have the presentation as part of this meeting. So if there are questions from the public about what we are talking about, they can have the information in real time as much as we do and go back and refer to it. So
Absolutely.
it was really helpful
You're
doing
welcome.
that. So thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much. Okay, that brings us to item number 17, which is approval to pay the following invoices from the general operating fund. We have Alpha Security Services for the Canada flag removal for $1,610. Bush Systems International for recyclable containers, $4,950.90. Champion for Arena Ballast for $1,577.52. Dennis Office Supplies for Library Toner Inc., $1,846.11. Dexter Machining for backhoe for $12,691.81. Dutchman Contracting, DTI for crushed gravel, $1,840. Emerge for the 2025 audit, $5,750. I did say that correctly. Island Home Hardware, the June and July statements, $11,942.34. Island Truck Repair for fire department repairs, $1,550.76. Island Truck Repair for fire department repairs, $1,562.87. Michael Green Electrical for the splash pad pump, $4,852.23. Michael Green Electrical for repairs of the DTI building for $5,335.43. Safety Source Fire for fire department fire helmets, $4,901.30. Saunders Equipment for Zamboni repairs, $3,964.53. Sullivan Sales and Service for GM 004, $11,045.91. And Sullivan Sales and Service for Transfer Station, I don't even know what that word is. That's the excavator. Oh, that's the excavator. I do know that word. $2,354.83. Councillor Ross.
Yeah, I just have a question. What is the GM 004? Is that your
All of our commercial trucks all have numbers, like the snow plows are 01, 02, the 550, 03, the transfer station would be 004.
So that's just a repair on the snowplow, that's pretty much what that is. Okay.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion to pay the pre-read invoices under the general operating fund.
You heard the motion from Deputy Mayor Sturgeon. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Question? All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carried. Yeah. Yep.
Mayor, I just ask a question about that.
Sure.
Recyclable containers, is that something new we're doing?
That's the bins that Dickie cleans out. We got 4 new ones.
Oh, okay.
Okay, item number 18 is transfers, and so it's a motion to transfer $42,235.60 from the Capital Reserve Fund to the General Capital Fund. You heard the motion from Councillor Greenlaw. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Ballantyne. Question? All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carried. Item number 19 is closed session. We have one item. It's a financial issue for Public Works equipment purchase. Looking for a motion.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion to go into closed session and discuss 19.1 financial public works equipment purchase.
You heard the motion from Deputy Mayor Sturgeon. Do we have a seconder?
Aye.
Seconded by Councillor Brady Ross. Question? All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming out. You did find somewhere to spend the night. I'm assuming you're not sleeping in your car?
I found somewhere.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Alex. I'll recall this regular council meeting in the Village of Grand Manan back to order. It's 9:00 p.m. We were in closed session to discuss one item, and it was a Public Works equipment purchase. And from that, I believe we have a motion.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we lease from Alpha Equipment a new 2026 JCB-417 with a 4-ax attachment.
You heard the motion from Deputy Mayor Sturgeon. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Greenlaw. Question? All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. Our next regular council meeting will be here at the Community Center on September 14th at 7:30 p.m. Again, thank you to our guys out back for getting us on air and making our sound somewhat sensible. Thank you, everybody. So looking for a motion to adjourn. I'll make that motion. Motion. Thank you very much.